Well, we're delighted today to have Andrew and Ruth Reid, who serve in Spain with Baptist Missions, along to hear a bit more about them and about the work they're doing in the land of Spain, and lessons maybe we can learn from their experiences that they can share with maybe potential people heading off or thinking about mission in the future. Ruth, we'll go ladies first and begin with you. Tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, your family, growing up, and anything else interesting about yourself.
Well, I grew up in Belfast, went to school there, and my family are Christians, so I was involved in church and church life from a very early age.
Okay, and when did you trust the Lord? When did you I suppose, come to faith?
As a young child, so I grew up with a very strong awareness of the need for salvation. And I think it was probably when I was about 10 that I had true assurance of salvation, but that was always a priority in our family.
Now, Andrew, you weren't born in Belfast. Tell us a little bit about your background and upbringing.
Well, I was born in Spain. My parents were working there, so they settled down in Spain, lived the rest of their lives there. So I was born there. That was in the city of Barcelona in Spain. So they're Christians too, and rather like Ruth, taught from an early age about the Bible, about God. And as a child, there was a very clear day for me. Some people have a clearer date they can point to. In my case, there was a very specific little meeting in which I realized that this message was for me, that God loved me, and that Christ had died for me, but that I needed to respond to that message, and I hadn't. And in a childlike way, was concerned that it was too late for me, but then was assured the next day as we traveled along in the car. So each person comes to know Christ in a different location. For me, it was in the back seat of a car as we traveled along the motorway, being assured that it was still possible for me to invite Christ to be the Lord of my life. So that's where my Christian experience began.
Lovely. If we can stay with your family for a moment, Andrew, and I know your dad's passed away recently, but your dad grew up, at least for his early childhood, in the land of Peru, because his parents, your grandparents were there. Tell us just a little bit about those connections. Obviously, you wrote the book by divine coincidence, telling the story of the Irish Baptist Foreign Mission, particularly centred in the land of Peru. So tell us a little bit about that family.
Well, so there is some family heritage there. The project of writing that book was an interesting one because it was an academic project, but it did lead me to discover lots of things about my own family roots I didn't know. So my grandfather, as you say, Stanley, was one of the very early workers sent out from Ireland to Peru. And so then my father was born and lived the first 9 years of his life there in southern Peru, and then was sent back on the ship across the Atlantic to come back and continue his schooling in Northern Ireland. So that's kind of the family background there, and it was just an interesting quirk in God's plans that many years later we ended up coming to talk to the Baptist Missions director about the possibility of joining if not the same exact organization, the one that has evolved from those early roots.
Yes. And so bring us, I suppose, kind of up to date with your family then. So you're married, obviously, and tell us just about children, and then I suppose your interest in mission and how that grew and developed, or maybe go back a little bit and just tell us how you met first of all, and kind of if there's any.
Okay, well, Andrew said he grew up in Spain, but he did come back to Belfast. He came to Belfast to study, and we met at university there, and also we attended the same church, Windsor Baptist Church, which we're still members of, and is our sending church. So that's how it all started. It took a while to get going because it was 7 years or something before we actually started going out together, but that's where we met each other. And we're now married, and we have 4 children who've all grown up in Spain, and first had to learn Spanish and then later on had to learn Catalan. So they're quite used to switching languages. One of them, our eldest daughter, is married and lives in Spain, and the other three are studying at the moment, studying in Ireland. For me, the journey towards Spain is probably started when I was really quite young, in my early teens. I felt from very early on there was such need in the world to hear the gospel when so many people didn't know, and I had the privilege of growing up in a country where it was much easier and where there were so many churches. So the need in the world was something that impacted me very early on. We also have missionaries. I have missionaries in my family, in uncle and aunt, and even a great uncle and great aunt. So from early age, I knew about missionaries leaving and going to live in cross-cultural situations. And so through my teens and into my 20s, I felt God was leading me to some kind of cross-cultural mission situation out of my own country.
So missionary heritage in both your families, and in fact, Andrew, we won't go into detail on this today, but obviously at one point a great uncle of yours, Cyril Reid, was serving with what was then the Irish Baptist Home Mission, while your grandfather Stanley was in Peru. So that's an interesting, just how in a sense as a family there was lots of missionary interest at that in that generation. For you, Andrew, did you come to Belfast to study with a view of always going back to Spain, or how did God begin to direct you? Obviously Ruth was having that interest in mission. How did yours develop?
It's always easier to see when you look back, isn't it, than when you look towards the future. No, when I came to study, I came to do a physics degree at Queen's and had no idea what I would do after that. The world was opening up in front of me at that stage, and neither had I any clear sense that I would spend the longest period of my life directly involved in Christian ministry either. The fact of having strong family heritage was something that was confusing to me. I wasn't sure what to make of it and tended, when I was a teenager, to discount it. I do remember from an early age finding that there were certain passages in the Bible that just seemed to vibrate and resonate, and passages that talked about the nations or about the world, but I tended to think, oh, that's just because your family is sort of interested in these things, and tended to assume that could not be part of how God was leading me towards my own life vocation. So I enjoyed science. I also enjoy history, and basically just chose to do a degree in physics because it seemed to offer lots of different opportunities and looking for work afterwards. And then I did work for 3 years as a petroleum engineer. But in the back of my mind, I was wondering about, is this my lifelong vocation, or should I be doing something else? Conversation with my then pastor, Roy McMullen in Windsor Baptist, was very helpful. He suggested I get out and get some life experience, and that was very good. But also to draw a mental line, he suggested go and work for 3 years and then reevaluate. Are you meant to be an engineer for the rest of your life? Or might God be kind of saying retrain for a different direction? At that point, it was clear to me, no, this is what I'm meant to do. I'd begun to discover that I thought maybe the gifts that God had given me lay in the direction of teaching in some kind of way. And then it was sort of a bit kind of logical. Well, I already have Spanish, and so one summer trip to Peru was part of trying to just knock on doors and figure things out. At that point, there were 7 times more true believers, evangelical believers in Peru than in Spain. And a little bit of research showed me that was true right across all the countries of Latin America. So it just kind of took me full circle to say, well, why not Spain? Spain is the neediest Spanish-speaking country in the world. And so then that began to just seem, well, so looking back, so all this heritage, all these experiences, actually add up. They're not hurdles. They're actually, once you see it, sometimes God must, I think, if I can put it reverently, smile at our confusions. I've made it so clear for you. Why can you not just add up 2 plus 2? So, but God's very patient and allows us to stumble our way forwards and find our path. So that may be a long answer to what was a short
No,
question.
that's very helpful. And in a sense, then, did you? At what stage then were you married? Were you, in a relationship that you both came to that place, or began to dawn that okay?
One thing was, I knew Ruth was interested in mission, but I knew that you had been part of a prayer group thinking about the Muslim world, and I'd kind of thought, maybe that doesn't fit with me. That was actually something we had to explore, whether could we be thinking of the same part of the world, and then discovering you had been in Spain visiting. You had an uncle as well who served in Spain, and so that was just another little piece of the puzzle.
So it began to become clearer. And obviously at the time we're recording this, you've served now almost 24 years in Spain, and Lord willing, come next year it'll be a quarter of a century, which begins to make us all feel old in terms of where we understand. But I suppose looking back over that time, and you've obviously had various experiences, you've been in different ministry locations. How has the Lord sustained you both through those years? When I'm sure there's been tough times and there's been tears and disappointments, and how has God managed to, or how have you managed to persevere, I suppose, in the midst of when it's not easy?
Yeah. Do you want to answer first, or shall I?
A few things that come to mind. I think that it helps. At times I've had to revisit the calling that I believe God had made on my life when I was younger, and how that has been confirmed in different ways and at different crucial moments, particularly decision moments when there might have been a few options. And so that has been helpful, and I do believe that God has called me and called us to this to this situation. We don't know for how long, but certainly it was always thought to be long term. Also, I think we've really appreciated the support of other people. We are part of Baptist Missions, and there's no doubt that in particularly difficult moments, we've had great support from the mission. And we are so thankful for that always. And our home church has been a very crucial part in that too, with visits and just people that we can be open with. And we really appreciated that. And also the group of churches we work with in Spain, the Federation. Again, we are in a partnership arrangement with them. We are not just going solo over there where we think it is a good idea. We are also part of something bigger over there, and there's a network of support that we have benefited from and been blessed by through the years.
Well, actually, maybe pause there for a minute and maybe kind of ask that question in terms of, if we look on the other side from the perspective of somebody or a church sending a couple overseas, what would you both say in a sense of how best can a church locally? Because although, in a sense, you've gone with Baptist Missions, our conviction is that ultimately it's your local church that sends you, and obviously you've been very grateful for the support you received. But for other churches maybe who either are contemplating sending somebody, or somebody's maybe in the wings to go, what would you say from your on the receiving end? How best can a church on the home base support those who are serving overseas?
Well, I think some of those things that Ruth has been talking about, those networks and that you're mentioning, are God's gift in this situation. And we can see it right back in the New Testament. They're local churches, but then Paul has this group of 9-10 people he moves about with from one place to another. Obviously, it wasn't structured like a mission today, but someone in one of those little local churches that sprang up, and there was this young person, and Paul says, "Can I take this person with me?" That was all a means that local church would not have had. So building relationship in network is such a gift, and it also helps with the difficult times that you were mentioning in a previous question. You've got a safety net in place. But then I think back to when we knew some years ago, who contrasted two periods in her life. She went out twice into a very difficult country in the Middle East. And the first time, she sort of slipped out one Sunday. No one really knew she was leaving. And then in a later stage in her life, it just so happened, we were in the church at that stage, and the church took an interest. So all the membership just knew this was happening. We had her up at the front, and she told her story, and her prayer letter was distributed amongst the membership of the church. And we prayed for her, and she felt the backing of the church. That is a tremendous vote of confidence when inevitably someone is going to come along in some circumstance sooner or later and question you and doubt. And then there's going to be the internal doubts that are going to come up in your mind and heart. Am I in the right place? Am I doing the right thing? Sooner or later, we're all going to be in situations like that. And to be able to think back and think, well, my church, they stood with me. They prayed with me. The elders of the church say, no, we confirm what you're seeing and sensing in your heart. We see it too. Has a tremendous value. Then there's all kinds of practical things, of course. No one can go out on their own without primarily prayer support. And we're not going to achieve anything without people praying. And then when people pray, then financial support is found. We can't do anything without that either. But it's so helpful when there's a flow of information back and forth, when you sense that your church are interested in people, get in touch, and there's emails and there's WhatsApps, and then you can put the cream on the cake, when there are churches that are very good, and we're so blessed in the church that has sent us out and looked after us so well. There's the little details at Christmas, or the little extras that, that no one, it's not written down anywhere that a church has to do these things, but it's just, you just feel loved, and that
and cared for and not forgotten, because you're not.
Yeah. And then, of course, when it's possible for the pastor or one of the pastors or someone else delegated by the church to come out and to see what you're doing, and because inevitably you try and use your letters well and put the information in, but not everything can be put in the public arena. And not everything fits in a letter. So inevitably, if someone can come out and see where you are and see what you're doing, they go back with such a better picture. So those are just some of the practicalities that we have benefited from and have really valued.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Ruth, loneliness can often be an issue on the mission field, particularly maybe for wives, because husbands can be busy doing their thing, and obviously you're involved in ministry too. We'll come to that in a minute. But have you ever experienced loneliness, and how has maybe support from home church helped maybe in that over the years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly in the earlier years when the children are very small, and a lot of time is spent at home, and there's not the family support or easy babysitting arrangements. So yes, those can be obviously there were difficult moments there, but we had the benefit of being in Spain. It's not so far away, so visits were important, even for a week. So that was important for me. And then as time's gone on as well, social media, WhatsApp, is so easy to be in touch nowadays. And even in the early years, I used to often think back to the missionaries from 100 years ago, like Andrew's grandparents, and think, wow, it was such a different situation then. And you really have to admire how people stuck it out and with real loneliness. But I have friends we have friends who stay in touch via WhatsApp and who've maybe visited. And again, because of us not being so far away, we were able to come home pretty regularly, and that was also a good. And that's just part of modern life. It wasn't possible 50 years ago or 100 years ago, but that is one of the benefits. Probably has its downsides too, some people would say, but yes, contacts from home, very important, because especially friendships that have been there for years and people who you have so much overlap with, it's lovely to stay in touch, and those friendships have become more precious in some ways as the years have gone on.
Andrew, can I ask you, I suppose, not really a controversial question, but I suppose a lot of people go, say, to overseas and they need to learn a language. The pressure maybe or the expectation upon the mission agencies that sent them is to kind of hear results and hear the work they're doing and so forth. And yet, really, before they can do anything really effectively, the language is the key. And would you be a strong advocate that it's important for a person to take as much time as they need to really learn the language well and therefore have a lifetime of ministry in front of them? Or does it matter that much if they ever really grasp the language properly at all?
Well, let me load the question even more. The period of language learning is often a difficult one for people who have arrived in another country. It requires time. It feels often like not directly useful time. You feel you're not producing, you're not achieving, and almost inevitably there will be periods where you feel not only lonely, like we were talking about a few minutes ago, but very useless. And people that are considering whether God is calling them to go and live and serve in another country need to be ready to become useless initially. And people that are going to ultimately be useful in another country are people who probably have been very active and useful already in their home country. And then you go through this period where you're useless. And that is difficult unless you know this is going to happen. And even if you know it's going to happen, it's not easy to go through. So why spend time doing that? To become useful. It depends on what you are going to do. If you're going to go and dig a well for, I don't know how long it takes to dig a well, by review my ignorance, but whatever length of time that takes, and that's the job, and then you're going back home, no, it wouldn't make sense to spend 3 months, 2 years trying to learn the language. And by the way, I've said 3 months, but it's not 3 months. The rule of thumb I used to hear bandied about between people years ago, and I haven't read anything recently to know if this is still the case, but they tend to talk about 2 years. And what you know after 2 years is what you're going to know. So in one sense, I would be keen that people take that on board and that their job is to get the language. We, in our first months, didn't have the initial start that we would have wanted. I don't know, it was in the little church we were attending, not a model of how to do things. It was announced from the pulpit that I was now a deacon, and it was announced from the pulpit that I was now the youth leader after only a few months attending there. So this is not leaving a recording of how to do things. But that didn't help for both of us, and maybe particularly in Ruth's case, for Ruth to have sufficient time for proper language study. And inevitably, the more you can get, the better. It's not the only thing. We can find people who will talk about their memories of someone who brought the gospel to their town, and even though they never really, could get a great accent or pronunciation ever, but everybody knew that they really loved people. Well, that's ultimately even more important, but it depends as well what kind of thing you're going to do. If it's a practical service you're going to be carrying out, you can get by with less high-level language. If you're going to be involved in teaching, writing, then these ministries or these tasks require higher and higher level of language.
Obviously, Ruth, for you guys moving from the south of Spain up to the northeast corner, you not only had to learn Spanish, but you learned Catalan as well, and your children too. So was that an added struggle, if you like, in terms of, well, I'm just mastering one now, we've kind of go and do number two. Was that difficult?
Yes, because when we initially went to Spain and we were looking at locations, I thought not Catalonia, because I have enough on my plate to learn Spanish. And so I had thought, no, please, not there. But yeah, when we moved to Catalonia in the end, I knew that was a priority. I had to study Spanish almost from scratch when we arrived. and because of our circumstances was not able to dedicate enough time to it, as I see it. And there wasn't provision made in our initial stage for me to spend long enough studying Spanish. So when we went to Catalonia, within a month, I signed up for Catalan. And my Catalan is not as good as my Spanish, but it's so important. And especially now, we're in a situation where we're trying to use Catalan to reach Catalan people who are so largely unreached. And to reach them, we need to speak Catalan. Spanish is not enough, because for many people, Catalan is their heart language.
Yeah.
And it means a lot often to people that we have made the effort to learn Catalan, and that we're not just happy to speak to them in Spanish, although they understand Spanish perfectly. It is actually a great way to enter friendship, into relationship, when they see that you've made the effort. You don't speak perfectly, you make mistakes, but they've really appreciated our effort to speak to them in their own language.
Yes. Well, let's stay then in Catalonia and reaching Catalans in terms of the ministry you're involved in, Ruth, and reaching out to ladies, to discipling women. You were involved in a lot of children's ministry as well, but that has kind of come to a natural end, and you've been released from that responsibility. But tell us about, I suppose, what you do and how, in a sense, the Lord is using you in that Catalan context, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Well, our church is quite mixed. We have a lot of non-Spanish as well. And in many ways, a lot of, particularly from South America, a lot of those women are very open. And I've had lots of opportunities to disciple or to spend time studying the Bible with women who are just finding out and who've never really studied the Bible. And that's been great. And I still continue to do that. But I'm always on the lookout as well for meeting Catalan-speaking people who, most of whom they don't have a Bible, and they know very little about the Bible. And so that's another area I'm trying to develop. It's harder. I have friendships with many Catalan women, but it's a very secular society. People feel quite self-sufficient and not immediately aware of any deep spiritual needs. And if they are aware of some need, they don't think about looking in the Bible or looking to God for the meeting of those needs. So that's kind of what I'm involved in. But I meet with women from different nationalities, Spanish as well, and new believers mostly, or people who are almost there. That's kind of what I do most of my week, spent with meeting 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 with a whole range of women.
And Andrew, your main ministry now, tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so we moved to northeast Spain, to Catalonia, principally for me to take up a role with Evangelical School of Theology, which is a distance learning school. We train normally about 40 people each term. We're mainly operating online. It's a distance learning school focused on providing quality training for people in bivocational situations. So people are, there may be an engineer, or they work in some other job. Maybe they're very involved already in church leadership. It might be a youth leader, it might be a serving elder or serving pastor, but they've never had the chance to get any Bible training. So that's what we're set up to do. And I was basically tricked. I was invited to come and work with the school, and I didn't know that the principal only had a year to go to retirement. So that was neatly laid up, waiting for me. So after protesting and trying not to become the principal, eventually I realized someone had to do that job. So it is a privilege to serve in that capacity and try and provide leadership to the team. We have about 30 online teachers, but there's a team of 5 to 6 people, none of them full-time, in the kind of core team of that. So that's my main role. I'm an elder in our local church, and excited too about our dreams for our own town and next door town, but my main role is with the School of Theology.
And maybe tell us, Andrew, I suppose a little bit about, obviously Ruth touched on the, I suppose you both have on the vast spiritual needs in Spain, and obviously there's many places, many towns, villages in Spain where there's no gospel witness whatsoever. The need, though, in terms of church leadership and you know, within even the federation that we partner with, you know, very few pastors who are called and supported by the church.
So as you look at the map of Spain, or even if you just focus in on Catalonia, where we are 8 million people, or almost 8 million people, and the vast majority of them have not heard the gospel even once. So there's the ongoing need for evangelism. And then even when there's little groups of believers come into being, just to be able to guide them into planting a church and establishing an ongoing witness. And those churches then need leadership. They need pastors and other ministries as well. So you're right. In Spain, there is an unusually low proportion of churches that have full-time pastors or other leaders in other functions. So our own, the Federation of Churches that we work with there, here in Ireland we're an association there, we call it, in Spain a federation. There's between 60 and 70 churches and about another 30 smaller groups. But of those 70 churches, only 22 have a full-time Spanish pastor supported by the church. So that compared to other countries, even next door countries in Europe, it's very different to France, for example, where the proportion would be far higher. So that's partly why our school is working hard to try and help people who are in bivocational situations, because that's the majority, but also help this Federation of Churches move towards having more full-time pastors. And so our dual plan, it's like an apprenticeship scheme, is particularly focused on that, trying to help churches begin to get over the hurdle of first having a full-time pastor. And delighted that 2 out of those 22 pastors have come through our program after only 2 graduations. So
yes,
that's a particular program we're excited about.
Yes, I was going to say there's been recent real encouragement in that, and a joy to see. And while we haven't played a huge part, obviously through you we've played a significant part in terms of Andrew and Ruth Reid being in Spain, but also to the joy of seeing people going through the training under the ET and then going on to serve then in the program dual, and in a sense going on to serve then as pastors in the church.
No, Baptist Missions has played a very significant role in this. Yes, so people seeing this interview who have prayed and have given financially, and then the staff here in the Baptist Missions headquarters, the mission director, and also Joanne, all of that is part of us being in Spain. And then there's financial support, and the mission has found support for one person coming through the program. And so this is a very kind of strategic thing, very highly, carefully selected students, because they need to live on something. They're full-time even whilst they're being trained. They're spending half their time studying, half their time already serving, so they can't have another job when they're on this program. So we peg it to the minimum wage, but that minimum wage has to be found. And so the local church has to come up with at least 3/4 of it, but we have a scholarship fund, and Baptist Missions has helped with that. So no, if we went and talked to Isaac, the first one to come through, or we talked with Eric, the second guy to come through, they are so grateful. And Miguel now, hopefully, Lord willing, this spring will become the third. Yeah. And serving in a little church where in most directions you'd have to drive for 50 miles before you found any other evangelical witness of any kind. Well, this is very strategic.
So in many ways, the fields really are wide on the harvest in Spain, and the labourers are few in terms of whether it's church leadership, pastor-wise, but in terms of reaching all those towns and villages and suburbs of major cities where there's nothing. I'm certainly in our churches even meeting more and more people who are studying Spanish, and people are learning Spanish and so forth. What would you say? obviously that maybe young people, maybe at a similar stage that you were at, when you were maybe beginning to go out together or beginning to think more seriously about serving overseas. There's obviously the lure of, you could have stayed in the petroleum industry, probably, be on a 6-figure salary all your life, and all the if you like the perks, the temporary perks, if you like, that come with that. And there's a big pressure, I think, on people now just to live for the here and now. So what advice would you give to somebody who maybe is learning Spanish, has a burden for lost people, is thinking maybe God is calling me? What would you say to someone like that in terms of what next steps should they be thinking about?
Well, the first thing I would say is don't brush it away. If in your heart you feel the stirrings of, could this be me, don't brush it away. Listen to your heart. Listen to what God is saying to you. Listen to those passages in Scripture that for some reason they leap off the page and they grip you, but the person beside you doesn't react the same way. It may be an indication that this is you, that God has gifted you this way, that God has called you this way. We all have different roles to play. And it's not that one is better than another. But in today's world, it does seem that there is less and less openness to thinking this could be a long-term commitment. It's scary. I think people just kind of begin to feel, oh, that would tie me in. It's not that you have to sign on the dotted line, but to be open that God's calling on your life is actually the best pathway to walk. And you're not going to get more enjoyment out of life, or more freedom out of life, or more excitement out of life out of that pathway. There's nothing better than serving Christ. And so if that's being an engineer in an oil platform, well, so be it. But we also need people who will leave those walks of life and give their life to spreading the gospel and serving God in areas where there is less awareness of the gospel, and also to kind of, I would say to someone, investigate. Some of the songs we sing sometimes give us the impression that the whole world is already praising God. No, the whole world is not praising Christ. There are so many needy areas in the world, and in some of them we're not even going forwards. We're retreating, and this dishonors Christ. We've got to do something about this. So listen to your heart, investigate, get information. There are different mission agencies. Contact someone, find out. Talk to your local church leadership too. Be active in your own church. Sometimes people can think, well, maybe if I go to Timbuktu, I'll be really useful over there. Well, have you tried doing something in your local environment first? Test it, try and discover what your gifts are locally. Get as much training as you can as well.
Yes.
Talk to your pastor. Talk to Baptist Missions. Why not? So there's the investigation, talking to others, and actually being able to travel. It's so easy nowadays. There are very few countries you can't visit at all. So why not go and just go and pray, ask God to confirm to you that this is what He's saying to you, and talk to people who are living and working in that country.
Yeah, and people can serve short term as well. And
yeah,
although we're not a huge mission and we don't have big fancy programs, I suppose one of the benefits of being a smaller mission is that we can tailor make opportunities for people, maybe for 2 weeks, a month, or 6 months, whatever it is, and we're open to that.
Yeah, and use that to investigate.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you both very much for your time today. There's no kind of trophy or anything, but you are, I think, currently the longest serving Baptist missions workers in all fields since the Peru's have retired. That's not to make you feel old or anything. It's just but we appreciate so much. We appreciate so much the two of you, the work you do. But in a sense, we love your fellowship in Christ as well. And I know folk in churches have really enjoyed meeting you both when you're home on deputation. And thank you so much for your time today. The Lord bless you.
Thank you.